Escar, Exum, Froelich, Geithner, Gonzalez Gutierrez, Gray, Hanks, Arid, Holtorf, Hooten, Jackson, Representative Jackson is excused, Judah, Kennedy, Kip, Larson, Montine, Luck, Representative Luck is excused, Lynch, McCluskey, McCormick, McKean, McLaughlin,
Present.
Michael C. Representative Valdez A is excused. Valdez D. Van Bever. Van Winkle. Weissman. Will. Williams. Woodrow. Woog. Young. And Mr. Speaker.
With 62 present, 3 excused, we have a quorum. Representative Bradfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the Journal of Wednesday, March 10th, 2021 be approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk.
Thank you, Representative Bradfield. You have heard the motion that the journal be approved. I don't know if there's further discussion, but all right. Minority Leader McKean.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have a question of the mover of this. What are those corrections? No, I would not do that to you. I would not do that to you. Carl would be able to tell you, but that would be rude. I would ask for a no vote.
Okay. All right, very good. You have heard the motion that the journal be approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. It's getting later in the week. You can tell it's Thursday. The ayes clearly have it. The motion is adopted. Announcements and introductions. Representative Michelson-Jeannet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Public and Behavioral Health and Human Services Committee, please note we will not be meeting tomorrow, Friday. The bills that were scheduled to be heard will be rescheduled for a later time. Again, the Public and Behavioral Health and Human Services Committee will not be meeting tomorrow, Friday.
Thank you, Representative Michelson-Jeannet. We have another announcement on the wall, so everyone please pay attention. Representative McLaughlin.
Hello, Education Committee. We're not meeting tomorrow either, but we never do anyway, so that should not be a surprise. But we are meeting today, and at 1:30, room 107, and we will be listening to some wonderful informative speeches by Department of Education and the State Land Board, followed by House Bill 1055. So we hope to see you, room 107, at 1:30 today, not tomorrow. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. Representative Byrd.
Good morning, colleagues. House Finance Committee, we get to meet today upon adjournment in Committee Room 112. We're going to be hearing House Bill 1071, 1039, 1109, and 1069. So once we adjourn, I'll give you about 10 minutes to head down to Committee Room 112, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Great, thank you very much, Representative Byrd. Representative A. Valdez will be recognized and is present.
Good morning, everyone. Energy and Environment will be meeting this afternoon at 1:30 in LSBA. Today we're hearing 1141, 1145, and 1162. Be there or be square.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Business Affairs and Labor Committee, we are meeting this afternoon at 1:30. We will hear House Bill 1026, House Bill 1051, and then House Bill 1007, 1:30 in room 112.
Awesome. Representative Duran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind everyone that the Children's Caucus will be meeting virtually today at noon to hear about the impacts of COVID on children's mental health. The Zoom link was also sent and shared with you in your state email. Hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Duran. I did say awesome after Representative Roberts' announcement, and I didn't actually mean that. All right, any further announcements or introductions? Going once, going twice. Majority Leader Escar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the following bills be made special orders on Thursday, March 11th at 9:09 a.m. Senate Bill 90, Senate Bill 68, House Bill 1103, House Bill 1114, House Bill 1076, House Bill 1060, House Bill 1097.
And what time did you say, Madam Majority Leader?
9:09.
9:09. Thank you very much.
9:09.
The committee will come to order. With your unanimous consent, the bills will be read by title unless there is a request for reading a bill at length. Committee amendments will not be read unless requested, as they are printed in your bill folders. Floor amendments will be shown on the screen and on your iPads and not read unless requested. Bills will be laid over upon motion of the Majority Leader, and the coat rule is relaxed. Okay, Mr. Gregorio, could you please read the title of SB 21-090?
Senate Bill 90 by Senator Smallwood, also Representative Hooton, concerning the renewal of a small group health benefit plan issued to an employer that no longer meets the definition of a small employer after the small group plan was first issued.
Representative Hooton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, this bill was brought to me by Senator Smallwood, who is a health insurance broker.
Representative Hooton, could you please move the bill?
Madam Chair, I move Senate Bill 90.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you. It's my first time at the will this session. Okay. So anyway, this bill is brought to us by Senator Smallwood, who is a health insurance broker. And what he has noticed in his business is that small businesses who receive a health insurance plan and they have to have 100 employees or less, have an employee base that will fluctuate, perhaps 10 or 15 people over the course of a year. Most health insurance plans allow for that fluctuation in the number of employees and allow them to stay on their small health insurance plan. However, there are a few health insurance providers who will force these small companies into large health insurance plans, which is disruptive and it's expensive and not necessary, actually. And so he has proposed that for the small businesses in Colorado, if the plan is not significantly changed, that they remain protected or covered by the small business health insurance program.
Ladies and gentlemen, members, can you please keep it down or take your conversations off the floor? I am having a difficult time hearing Representative Hooton, who just gave a great presentation about her bill. Representative Baisley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We heard this bill in Health and Insurance Committee. This bill is great for small businesses, especially small businesses that are struggling through their growth spurt beyond 100 employees. It's a critical moment, and to not have to go change to an entirely different benefits package for their employees. It would just be a great benefit for our Colorado employers, and it'd be even better for our Colorado citizens. It's a wonderful bill. I appreciate Representative Hooton bringing this with Senator Smallwood for consideration, and I highly, strongly recommend a yes vote on this bill. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of SB 21090. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Gregorio, could you please read the title of SB 21-068?
Senate Bill 21-068 by Senators Gardner and Lee, also Representatives Soper and Snyder, concerning the enactment of the Colorado Revised Statutes of 2020 as the positive and statutory law of the state of Colorado.
Representative Soper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Senate Bill 68.
Please proceed.
Oh, thank you. This is probably the most important bill of the year. It's the bill to enact what we did last year into law, but it's also the bill that looks at punctuation, grammar, capitalization, verb tenses, numbering, and harmonization. It's non-substantive changes, but it does enact the positive and statutory law for the state of Colorado.
Representative Snyder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just have to say, it's really a pleasure to serve with you.
And it is such a pleasure to serve with you.
Thank you. Yes, as my respected colleague, Vice Chair of the Legal Services Committee said, this is an annual bill in order to enact the positive and statutory law. But one thing, it does include the special session we had at the end of November and December. So with that, I would ask for a yes vote.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question... I am sorry. And before we go to further discussion, we really do need you all to keep it quiet, okay? So take your conversations off the floor. There are other places to have conversations. Thank you. So Representative Van Winkle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members,
Representative-
I have a lot of issues with the year 2020. It was a horrible, no good year, to be honest. And I want to put it behind me. I don't want to enshrine it forever in our statutes, so I got a problem with this bill.
Representative Gray.
I couldn't agree more. There's not a lot of folks in their workplace that can erase an entire year. But if we're going to erase a year, 2020 would be a great year, so I urge a no vote.
Okay. Representative Sandridge.
Excuse me, gentlemen. I stand in opposition to this bill. A vote for this bill is a vote for 2020. I give it a thumbs down. Thank you.
Okay, now is there any further discussion? Thank you very much. Seeing none, the question before us is the passage of SB 21068. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? I'm sorry, but the ayes have it.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Gregorio, could you please read the title of HB 21-1103?
House Bill 21-1103 by Representatives Cutter and McLaughlin, also Senators Pedersen and Quorum, concerning implementing the recommendations of the Media Literary Advisory Committee in Elementary and Secondary Education created pursuant to House Bill 19-1110.
Thank you, and we are going to go into a brief recess. Recess is over. Let us continue. HB 21-1103. Representatives Cutter and McLaughlin, does anybody wish to come move the bill? Representative McLaughlin? Or Representative Cutter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move House Bill 1103.
Thank you. Please proceed.
This media literacy bill simply implements findings of a media literacy committee created by the Department of Education, and they created a bunch of standards and best practices, and Representative McLaughlin and I just would like to see those best practices implemented, or media literacy implemented into standards into K through 12, reading, writing, and civics, the next time those standards are due to come up.
Representative McLaughlin? Representative McLaughlin, you are muted.
Oh, I thought I wasn't. So anyway, it's good to see you from up here. This bill helps to teach our students how to think critically and to analyze what they read. Media literacy is designed to prevent misinformation and disinformation from spreading between the sharer and the reader and beyond. So it's a great bill.
Thank you very much. Is there any further discussion? Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, members, I rise in opposition to 1103. You know, we heard this particular bill in education a couple days ago, and there were some good points that were made. Certainly, I can appreciate the effort that has gone into this and the attempt to try and offer something to students that may be, in some people's opinions, helpful. But I think that the piece that we're missing is critical thinking is really what we need to get at, right? We need to be able to teach critical thinking. And so as I looked at 1103, I had some concerns.
Representative Geithner, excuse me. Please take your conversations off the floor or speak extremely quietly so we can all hear what Representative Geithner has to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so, members, as I was saying, I had some concerns. And one of those concerns is that obviously the premise of 1303 is to establish a resource bank. And the resource bank's purpose is to be a central location where teachers, educators can look to for resources when it comes to teaching media literacy. So a little bit of background, obviously a lot of the media literacy, or the media literacy as we see it today, was actually predicated on a bill from 2019. Some of you were here for it, some of you weren't. And that was House Bill 1110. That stood up a committee that went through the process of identifying what resources might be available, which might be helpful, through a committee process, published a report, and in that report are the resources that would go into the resource bank that 1103 is looking to create. So as I looked through the resources, I became concerned with some of what I was seeing. And I say that because I think it's important that we recognize that we have a lot of diverse thought within this body. And amongst the people of Colorado, there is a lot of diverse thought. And some of the items that I particularly saw, some I believe would find as controversial, that some would find as even biased. And I struggled with 1103 in the sense that if we're going to try and implement a curriculum and have a resource bank that in some thoughts might contain biased resources, then are we really doing what we endeavored to do originally? And so naturally I came to the answer of no, which I think many of you probably would. And so as I looked deeper into the bill, I understood that there was no process in which the public could weigh in and could say, well, wait a minute, maybe this resource shouldn't be in the resource bank. Or perhaps the public would say, hey, there's a really good resource that the committee didn't look to that should be in the resource bank. And so with that, I move L001 and ask that it be displayed.
The amendment L001 has been moved and is properly displayed. Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so, members, what this does is it doesn't change the premise of the bill. Everything about 1103 still stays intact. It's all there as it was originally drafted by the sponsors. In fact, I've already shared this amendment with both of the sponsors. I did speak about this in committee, and it's important that I share with you kind of some of the points that we discussed in committee. And that was one of them, was that it didn't appear that there was anything in the bill that specifically allowed the public to offer some sort of comment or process where the public could engage in determining what would be good or not so good to have in the resource bank. And so that's what this amendment does. It just simply adds to the bill a process where the public, the people of Colorado, whether that be teachers, whether that be parents of students, whatever that is, has a mechanism so that they can look to say, we would like to petition Department of Education, the Board of Education, in a manner that would say these resources either are appropriate or were not looked to or otherwise. And so it just creates a public process for the public to engage in what is the education of our students across the state of Colorado. So with that, members, I encourage a yes vote on L001 and ask for your support.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? L001. Representative Van Beber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To follow Representative Geithner, I guess I would like to start with saying, as an educator for over 20 years, this is one of the most egregious things I've seen in legislation in quite some time. When it comes to this bill, while I understand encouraging the ability to create critical and analytical thinking in our students, I'm deeply concerned, as is Representative Geithner, about the makeup of the original committee that created this. However, I do believe that this is a good amendment and that a free flow of public information that allows for discourse and dialogue and the ability to step away and or oppose what is being done is extremely important. So I support this amendment and I urge an aye vote on Amendment L001.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on Amendment L001? Representative Ketter. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's an honor to serve with you.
Honored to serve with you.
Members, I rise in strong support of this amendment. So, the underlying premise of this bill is to create better media literacy, better mutual understanding in society so that we can all discern what is and is not factual news. I don't know if that's a possible thing, but setting that aside, the importance of this underlying bill is, I think we can all agree that we're at a particularly difficult time in our democracy where there are a lot of heated opinions on both sides. Something like this is going to be under an extra level of scrutiny. I think allowing a mechanism for people who feel like a particular resource in a bank isn't serving the underlying purpose, is biased when we're talking about media literacy, just giving them a mechanism is going to be crucial to the appearance of this bill, that this is something that's fair and that's serving its underlying purpose. And again, there's going to be times, in our society, even in the last decade, there are terms and things that were very much acceptable 10 years ago that we no longer would ever utilize. Language, culture evolves. And this cannot be a static bank of resources. We are going to need to have a mechanism in the future to change this, to update it as resources become anachronistic, as the culture changes, terminology changes. We need to be able to have the public get involved and say, hey, you know what? This isn't an appropriate resource anymore because of X, Y, and Z. And again, this isn't giving them carte blanche. This is simply giving them the ability to petition the state. It's not saying that the state shall grant it. It's saying that they shall have the ability to come to CDE and raise a concern, and CDE can either accept it or it can be denied. So I think this is a fairly minor ask, and I think in the spirit of what this bill is trying to accomplish, I don't see where this would be an issue at all. So I urge strong support of this amendment.
Thank you. Representative Ketter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I urge a no vote on this amendment.
Okay, is there any other? Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members, I'm a little discouraged by the recommendation that we vote no. I appreciated Representative Larson. He reminded me actually one of the points in the committee hearing that we had on 1103, and the discussion came up about whether or not we should understand the resource bank to be a static resource bank. And we went back and forth a little bit, and it really isn't defined as to whether or not there will be additions or there won't be, or that there will be anything eliminated from the bank over time. And so there was an offer of, well, we go through a review process every 6 years. And so nothing is to be stale, so to speak, because through a standard review process, perhaps every 6 years, this would get looked at, and it would give an opportunity to make updates as needed. So the concern that I had with that was, well, 6 years can be an incredibly long time, especially if there's material or resources that seem to be controversial, biased in nature, or inappropriate. And so the public's mechanism for actually being able to weigh in on that becomes absolutely necessary. And so I don't know if any of you have gone to the resource which was the committee's report that was established in the makeup of the committee that the committee worked on in 1110 from 2019. But it's a PDF that's out there. You can Google. I think if you Google Colorado Education or Media Literacy and Committee, it'll take you to the report that's available for the public to see. And in that report, roughly 180 pages, 160 pages, the PDF is available. We brought up in committee that there was links or references to critical race theory, to 1619 Project, and other things. And while some of us might agree with that, there are certainly those in Colorado that would disagree with that. And so I find it troubling that we're going to establish a resource bank that is supposed to be there to assist educators in teaching and identifying bias, and yet the very resources that we are making available to educators across the state, to some, could actually be biased. And so as I looked through it, and I'll point out one of the areas where I kind of landed on very specifically, the PDF, of course, has an appendix, and each appendix has its own page number count. But if you look at the overall entirety of the PDF, on page 83 of the PDF, which is part of Appendix D, page 3, offers a link to, what is it called? It's called tolerance.org. And so if you go to tolerance.org, it sounds kind of benign, right? Maybe even good. It redirects you to learningforjustice.org. And as you go through learningforjustice.org, there is a segment in the bill, or I'm sorry, in the resource that talks about teaching on whiteness. Now, I know that race can be a difficult issue. It can come with its own challenges as we try and teach about it, the impacts of it, the challenges that we as a nation have faced with it, the disappointments that we have seen with it. But some of what it references at, sorry, I'm trying to find the website again. Learning for Justice is one of these things. This is what it talks about on whiteness. Teaching Tolerance proudly presents our 4-part webinar series, Let's Talk. This series covers a range of critical topics that can be difficult to discuss with students and colleagues. Why does whiteness fly beneath the race radar? We explored this question in recent Teaching Tolerance feature stories, and readers clamored for more information. We'll dive deeper in the final webinar of our 4-part Let's Talk series, which covers a range of critical topics that can be difficult to discuss with students and colleagues. This interactive webinar will guide you in reflecting on and defining white privilege through multimedia and group chats. We'll discuss whiteness as a racial identity with the understanding and acknowledging whiteness and the privilege and power attached to it is a necessary step in working toward racial justice. Members, this is by its very nature controversial to many families across the state of Colorado. And the fact that we would showcase this as a particular resource to teach our children, I think elevates a level of concern that this amendment, L001, can address, because it allows the public to then say, you know, I'm not sure that something like that should be in the resource bank. And so what am I able to do as a member of the public, a tax-paying member of the public, which funds our education system? What can I do? Well, Amendment L001 is the answer, because it creates a public process where the public can petition the Department of Education, their government, and say, this is something that we are not comfortable with. I can bring in another scenario, I guess, where maybe there is something that is lacking that should otherwise be in the resource bank. Again, this amendment would allow the public to come forth and to say, hey, we think that this was missed and it should be added. And so that's the point in Amendment L001. It is allowing the public a very natural process, which we have in all parts of government, to petition their government to make a change to something that they may see a need in making a change for. And so before we discount the merits of L001, the amendment, I think it's important that we reflect upon that's the very nature of what the public is supposed to be able to do. They are supposed to be able to come to their government and say, this is wrong or this is right. We'd like to see something adjusted here. L001 does that. Without L001 to 1103, I don't know that the public has that process. And I cannot, in good conscience, prevent the public from having a mechanism that they can use to petition their government to seek redress, change, what have you. And so, members, I would encourage, again, support for L001. I think it is an absolute necessary piece to make 1103 a little bit better, because it allows the public to have a voice. Please, let's not silence the voice of the public of Colorado that we were charged with here representing. Let us give them a mechanism. Let us give them their voice so that they can seek redress if they need to. Again, members, I encourage a yes on L001.
Thank you. Members, your voices are carrying quite well up to here, so if you could keep it down just a bit, that would help. Representative Cutter and then Representative Bockenfeld.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, first of all, I want to say that there's all kinds of books in a library, but not all of them you might like or agree with or whatever. And by the same token, there's all kinds of resources people can draw on for things. And I just want to remind you, this is just the primary consideration of this bill is just to help kids learn how to make good decisions, not telling them what decisions to make, just helping them understand what's credible and non-credible information, specifically in the media. I also want to say that I would be happy to work with Representative Geithner on an amendment specifically on lines 4 and 5. The department shall make the materials and resources in the resource bank accessible online to the public. I have no qualm with that at all. Representative McLaughlin and I would be happy to work with you on paring down the amendment to reflect that.
Representative, I think Pico was next. Thank you, Representative Pico.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I rise in support of this amendment. I've got a lot of heartburn with the bill itself, but this amendment goes a long ways to addressing the primary issue. And the primary issue is who decides what is misinformation or disinformation. We have a lot of problems in this country right now on those issues, and what's going on in the media is outright censorship of somebody's viewpoints. Who decides what goes into that bank and who decides what comes out of it needs to be open to the public. The public has to have a voice. I rise in support of this amendment. Thank you.
Now Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to the sponsor, I do appreciate the willingness to look at lines 4 and 5. I would offer, though, that I think the report itself, which is going to become essentially the resource bank, or the resources identified in the report, that report is already made available. It was easy for me to find through a simple Google search. So I would offer that the resources that will go into the resource bank are technically already available, but the piece that is not there is that once the public has the ability to view it, let's assume that, for an instance, that we would adopt an amendment that basically was line 4 and 5 of L001, there still wouldn't be a mechanism to allow the public to then engage with their government on the resources in the resource bank. And that's the critical point of this amendment. The resources are already available publicly. I found them. It wasn't necessarily handed to me in some sort of a supporting document for 1103. It was something that I went out and I naturally found. So while I can appreciate that, I think maybe codifying that in the bill could be definitely a useful thing, but I don't know that it necessarily gets to the point of what L001 does, and that is in creating a mechanism in which the public has the ability to come to their government and say, we are okay with this, we are not okay with this, or other. It gives the public voice. And that's what I was sent here to do. I was sent here, as all of us were, to be the public's voice. This mechanism ensures that the public has a direct voice themselves. And so, again, I urge us to support this amendment. It does nothing to impact the nature of the bill. It doesn't take anything away from it. It doesn't, if anything, it adds to it by including the public, because I think Representative Pico had a good point. Who gets to decide what is accurate information? Certainly, I would say that we should look to the public, and that's a path, that's a journey that we as Coloradans should take together. And knowing that we should take that path and walk that journey together, this amendment allows the public to be a part of that process. And that's all I'm advocating for in L001. So members, I urge us to consider L001 as a strengthening addition to the bill, because ultimately when we hear the people of Colorado's voice, then we're doing the people's work and we're doing it well. So members, I would urge us to support L001.
Thank you. Representative Holtorf. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, Representative Holtorf.
Thank you, Madam Chair, esteemed colleagues. I have a question for the bill sponsors. As I work in this chamber and work for the people of House District 64, I always want to promote transparency in state governance. I always want to promote inclusion and participation, particularly in matters of education with the parents. Now, I know in my school boards, in all of the school districts in my 9 counties, in my House district, parents are allowed to come to school board meetings. They are open, and parents can interact with the school board, which in and of itself is a committee that is making decisions on the education of the students in that community, in that school district, in that specific school. So my question is this: if we don't consider this amendment, then what are the provisions for inclusiveness? What are the provisions for transparency? What are the provisions for participation by the citizenry that we are here to serve? What is that mechanism? So I asked that question to the bill sponsors, and it's an important question because my colleagues are trying to open the door for that. Yet the door appears to be closed. So I'm confused. Bill sponsors, please help me understand this process that is so important to the education of our kids.
Representative Exum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I strongly do not like this amendment. It does not strengthen the bill. It dilutes the bill. And it dilutes the bill because we're trying to create resources that's going to be accurate for the public to be concerned with, And the bill opens up the door to increase, education for our students, not to deter that. And this amendment does not strengthen the bill. It dilutes the bill and weakens the bill. Vote no.
Is there any further discussion on Representative Holtorf? Or no, Representative Geithner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to my colleague, I can appreciate the concern maybe with the amendment, but I guess I fail to see how giving the public voice somehow takes away from the bill. Diversity of thought is a necessary piece of what makes our republic our republic. I don't know that anybody necessarily has the absolute right answer, and I think that's what 1103 is trying to offer students, is this is the right answer, but who is the arbitrator of what is accurate information, of what is misinformation, of what is bias, of what is not? I was taught many things in my family. Kindness was the first thing I was taught, regardless of who you are. And I think it's important that if we're going to navigate this journey together on where bias lies and how to teach our kids and allowing them to understand critical thinking and giving them the ability to see bias, then if we create a resource bank that some in Colorado would say is biased, then we're not doing what we endeavored to do. I, for one, don't want to be the one that's going to say, yeah, Colorado, this 1103 is the right way to do that we know how to arbitrate truth, that we know how to arbitrate what is accurate, what isn't accurate, where bias is and where bias isn't, because I would like the people of Colorado to come alongside me and say, you know what, Rep. Geithner, you're right, or hey, Rep. Geithner, you're wrong. And that's what this amendment does. Without the amendment, we are to just accept the committee's work and say, these are the resources. They were the arbitrators of information. So this does not, members, in any way weaken the bill. Because when we give the people of Colorado their voice, we strengthen all policy. This amendment gives the people of Colorado voice. And I can't silence it, and I won't stand by and let it not be given voice. And so that's what L001 does. Members, I encourage us to support L001.
Representative Benavides.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to, I was getting a little lost in the discussion. And I went and pulled the statute that we put in place last year, which was the Media Literacy Committee, in order to identify and make recommendations to the board of what goes in it. But as far as objecting to it, we didn't put that in. But it's the same as if someone has a book that their children are reading in school and they want to object to that book being used within the classroom, they can go to the school board without a rule existing. And on this, they could also go. Could I request a short recess? Because there's a problem with this bill on potential settled question. So could I request a recess or no?
Short recess, please.
Thank you.
Representative Benavides.
So, members, with this amendment, I think that the committee was established last year with who makes those decisions. It's already set in law who makes the decisions. This doesn't change that. Who decides what's in it? The bill refers to the committee saying the materials. And then if somebody doesn't like the things that are in there, again, they can already go to the school board without putting something in here, because that hasn't been considered by school boards and they haven't weighed in, but it can be done already. So effectively that can be done. And the first part of the bill, the amendment about sharing it with the public, I think the sponsor has already said she's more than willing to work with everybody on that, to put that in there. The second part, it's pretty much superfluous. It's not necessary to object to a school board. So I'd encourage people to oppose the amendment.
Representative Catlin? Representative Catlin, did you want to go now?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's an honor to serve with you.
I'm sorry. It's an honor to serve with you. Spacing up here. Looking for raised hands. So.
Sitting in my desk there, as this conversation's gone forward and as people were asking questions, and I think I missed out on the foundation of what we're talking about. What does the media library have in it? Will it have examples of famous speeches, and like I have a picture in my mind about libraries? Will it be something that my wife can go and pull up as a resource, bring back to the classroom, and be able to teach? I guess this is a little above my pay grade because I'm not in the school system. But I need the sponsors to give me an idea as to what the media library will look like when it's completed. Thank you.
Representative Pico.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to rise. I disagree with the comments that my esteemed colleague from El Paso County said that this weakens the bill. I think it actually strengthens the bill, and without it, the bill, frankly, is unacceptable. Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I rise in support of this amendment. I don't necessarily think this weakens the bill, or at least the intent of the bill, as I understand it from the bill sponsors. If I were to borrow a phrase from former Representative, now Senator Paul Lundeen, he would say this is sort of belts and suspenders. This is something that we can put into this specific bill to ensure that we actually do have a process by which the public can weigh in on the materials here. But I did want to ask the bill sponsors specifically with respect to the resource bank, which this amendment is trying to address. What are some of the things that are in there? I'm certain that there are things that are in that resource bank that are not terribly controversial, but there are some other things that Representative Geithner made mention in his speech as he laid out this amendment here that we're considering right now, specifically talking about wanting to have a discussion about whiteness. I'd like to understand why that would be in the resource bank, and if it is, what are some of the reasons for it being in there? Because if we're just putting it in there, then it would seem to me that it seems a little bit unbalanced with respect to people's differing views about race and culture and what we should be teaching our kids. If we're really interested in teaching our kids, how to think, then we should have a great diversity of resources within this resource bank. And if there's no mechanism to allow the public to weigh in on that, then I can't help but wonder if there's some other motive attached to this particular bill. But I don't know that unless we have a clearer understanding. So I'd like, if it's possible, for the bill sponsors to address this issue of one perspective that I think tends to be a little bit more left-leaning when we're talking about race, specifically when something in the resource bank does talk about whiteness. I'd like to know if that's in there, then why shouldn't we adopt an amendment like this to at least have some sort of mechanism or process in place to where we can discuss whether or not that particular item is appropriate, and if it is appropriate, what is something else that could be a counterbalance to that. So I certainly support this amendment. Not sure why it's being opposed, because the public should always have a role in what we determine here. But more importantly, I'd like to understand the rationale of why that's in the resource bank, specifically related to Representative Geithner's, presentation about a specific curriculum or resource that was, I think, controversial with respect to race and culture. So if anyone can give me a little bit more clarity within the majority about why we have that in there, that'd be great. Thank you.
Representative Bacon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to those who are listening, perhaps even those online, or to those who might be listening who are children who share my skin color, I want to say this to you and perhaps my colleagues in the corner. I believe this amendment was brought forward to question particular pieces of curriculum or ideals because I heard examples given or named. In particular, examples given around curriculum or work on 1619 and Teaching Tolerance, which is authored by the Southern Poverty Law Center. I too am an educator. I am an educator who was an educator of Black children. I was an educator of Black children in New Orleans, Miami, here, and in Denver. What I don't understand about this amendment is if we are arguing the veracity of the truth of what we know about how racism has plagued this country, or what the African existence originated as in this country and when. Or if we are arguing about talking about what local school boards can teach their kids. And what I think I heard today is that we're actually having a discussion about the history of the original sins of this nation, to which I said a month ago that despite that, this is still my country. So if we are arguing about local school boards' ability to connect to their communities and an example of something to remove is that history, that is highly problematic for the state of Colorado. And I am not trying to further divide us. I am telling you on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of children, including myself, who was one who never learned that my history began before the year 1619, we are doing a disservice to children if that is what we are advocating for. We are doing a disservice to white children if we do not tell them about their history. To suggest otherwise, it took years, if not a century, to put this history in front of children, period. In order to say that I do not deserve to be treated as a former slave, that I am not a criminal. If any of us care about opportunity gaps and achievement gaps, you need to understand the importance of kids being able to connect to what they are learning in order to perform. So I'm going to challenge all of us. I am okay with diversity of thought, but please recognize it was hundreds of years of that diversity of thought that got our history included in the first place. And to use that as an example as to why we shouldn't include it, to me, is an oxymoron. I don't understand. I am a local school board member. I believe in local control. I know there are things we do in Denver that we don't do in the mountains. But we have to norm. And so I would ask my colleagues again, please, if there are any arguments to make, I understand, but do not deny or use curriculum that codifies my existence as an example of something to pull out of teaching children in this state. I am asking for that respect on the people who died, to be able to share with you we are more than people who have been in bondage. I know every piece of history of what happened on the European continent from the dawn of time. How many of you know where the libraries of Timbuktu are? How many of you know who Mali Musa was? I know who all the Kings Georges were. I know who all the Queens Elizabeth were. But maybe 3 of you know who Nefertiti was. That is factual that they existed. If you all can't help me by sharing that you know that, please imagine what it was like to be a little black kid who did this to ask, what happened in Africa? Did I come from riches too? Because that is what children to this day are still asking in our classrooms. So thank you, and I hope again that we can talk about our differences in a way that does not deny who we are as an example. I know you need to learn things. I know people in the frontier have different needs, whether it's 4-H, but we cannot be using this as an example. Thank you for your time, and I respectfully ask that we lean into respecting each other and our history as we talk today.
Thank you. Representative Larson, I believe, was next. Oh, Representative Geithner is going to go. Thank you, Representative
Thank you,
Geithner.
Madam Chair. And to my colleague, please understand, I absolutely agree with you. I think that information, I think our history, I think educating our children on our history is essential to a rounded, well thought out education to make them good Coloradans and good citizens of this great nation. And this amendment, nor does this bill necessarily, I think, take away from any of it. It is very much about media literacy and the concern that right now in 1103, as you look at it, it is about media literacy. I don't want to make it about something other than what it is, but the public doesn't have a process in order to engage, because if you'll look at 1101, it doesn't just give the public the process to take stuff out. So before we even think that that's the nature of the amendment, it's not. If anything, it helps all communities across Colorado because it gives them the mechanism that they can actually make additions to. This bill is about media literacy. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for all cultures' history and how we all got to where we are as an American nation. The good, the bad, the ugly. We would not see the successes that we see today had it not been for the entirety of that history. So this bill is not about taking anything away. Or I'm sorry, this amendment is not about taking anything away. 1101 doesn't take anything away out of curriculum. It doesn't deny any part of history for any culture. Nothing. If anything, it is important that we understand that we achieve a better state through the voices of the people of Colorado being heard together, not saying that there is a select few that will determine what that looks like. That's not how we get to being the greatest that we can possibly be. And so before we make this amendment about something other than what it is about media literacy, and this amendment, or the bill is about media literacy, and the amendment is about a public process to engage and connect on what the children of Colorado may be exposed to. Diversity of thought. I think differently than other members of this body, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. The experiences that I bring from my life and the experiences that each and every one of us bring are what makes this body so great. This amendment says this body isn't the only voice that gets to weigh in on this. This amendment says that each and every Coloradan gets to weigh in on what this looks like. So if we want to talk about inclusivity, and we want to talk about all of that, then that's fine. I'm happy to talk about this. I thought, again, this bill was about media literacy, but let's ensure that the people across this great state have the ability to weigh in, have the ability to say, have you thought about this? Because we can't be as great as we all in this chamber desire to be without the voice of Coloradans being heard. I don't want to make this about anything other than what it is, and it is giving voice to the people of Colorado. That's what 1101 is. I'm sorry, that's what 001 is. It strengthens this bill. It does not dilute it. It does not weaken it. It allows a mechanism where the people of Colorado can come to the Department of Education and they can say, have you thought about this? Why wasn't this included? Why was this included? Maybe we should make a change. It says that the resource bank is not going to be static. It's not going to become stale. So please, I urge us, let's talk about 1103 and media literacy and the benefit that 001 brings to that, and not make it about something that it isn't, because I don't think that way. I've never thought that way. I would never bring forth policy that would encourage others to think one way. So members, I urge a yes on L001.
Is there further Representative Larson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, to be frank, I was a little bit disturbed to hear some of what my colleagues talked about, or I guess not disturbed, I would rather say confused, because this is a bill about media literacy. And if we were having a debate about a bill about history curriculum, or if we were having a debate about a bill pertaining to implementing a sociology curriculum, then I think that we would have a legitimate point to discuss here. But this is about media literacy. And why do we have resources in a bank that is supposed to teach our children on how to identify bias in media sources that don't pertain to bias in media sources? If this bill is actually about promoting those curriculums, then I would suggest that we get a new bill title and run a separate bill that's about creating new history curriculum or creating a resource bank for history curriculums across the state. But if we're trying to create literacy in media, I simply don't see where these resources are germane to that purpose. And it's not a statement of value on the underlying material, it's just it's not pertinent to media literacy. And this is exactly the kind of concern that I think that this amendment, and why this amendment should be added, is because this is a sensitive topic, colleagues. Like, we all have our own perceptions about what media bias is and isn't. And I agree, it's a worthwhile goal to pursue, but this is one we should be very delicate with because there are very different perspectives. And if we're going to try to put in resources into a resource bank that have a very dubious connection to media literacy, I think that that's going to raise a lot of legitimate concerns. And I think if we have a safeguard in here, that will at least give people the feeling that if they have concerns about what curriculum is being used to teach their children how to discern fact from fiction, that they can at least say, hey, look, you know what? I wonder why there are resources in here that don't seem to be anything about determining bias and are really, more about sociology or history curriculums. So, if this bill is really about media literacy, then why do we have a problem with creating an oversight process for the public to say, hey, you know what? I don't think that resource pertains to media literacy. I'd like to have a formalized hearing process, and maybe it'll stay in there. That's the thing that we're overlooking here. This isn't giving parents a veto power where they can walk in and have anything stripped out. This is simply saying they can have a conversation. And again, I suspect that this amendment will be used as much by, people on one side of the political persuasion as it will on the other side. And that's good and that's healthy. We should be having a lively discussion constantly about, what are appropriate social norms? What is bias in the media? Obviously, 10 years ago, social media did not have nearly the impact it has on media today. And having that evolve and having these resources evolve to adapt to technological and sociological changes is a great thing. But I don't understand why we're so dead set against allowing public input on a media literacy bank And I also don't understand why we have resources in a media literacy bank that don't pertain to media literacy. So with that, again, I urge support of the amendment. I really, frankly, don't see a reason for objection.
Representative Rich?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I rise in support of this amendment. I think Representative Larson said it pretty well, that we are talking about media literacy, and some of the things that have come up to right now have nothing to do with media literacy in some of these conversations. But it's the students, parents, it's all of us that pay these taxes for schools. And we should be allowed as the public to engage on what goes into that resource bank. There's no guarantee that the Department of Education will ensure ideological diversity. And there's no harm in allowing the parents or the public to have input. And I noticed that the sponsor came down pretty quick and wanted a no on this amendment. But this is important because it's important to the parents, and it's important that the children get that diverse piece in there. And it can't be all about one side. And if you read that report, there's a lot in there that has nothing to do with media literacy. I urge I vote on this amendment.
Representative Williams?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members, I rise in support of this amendment. I think it's something that we do need to pass, and I do, want to echo the amendment sponsor's intention here. It's to give a voice to the people within this process on determining what's within this resource bank. I'm struggling here to really view the overall bill, absent the amendment, as a media literacy bill. Some of the things that have been expressed about what's in the resource bank or what's currently recommended to be in the resource bank are a bit concerning to me, especially if there's no process by which the public can weigh in on the matter. I guess I'm kind of old school. I happen to believe that more speech is always better, more knowledge is always better. If people can draw on multiple resources from various differing points of view, then we're all better served. With that knowledge, with that ability to communicate with one another without being hindered in any way by the government is always going to be something that this body should try to uphold. But right now, absent this amendment, there does appear to be a static or nearly static list of resources that educators could draw on. And from what I'm seeing, the more and more I look at this list, it does tend to be one-sided. And if we don't have a counterbalance, or at least allow for the possibility of a counterbalance, then I'm not sure if I necessarily buy that this is about media literacy. So absent this amendment, I certainly can't support this bill, even though I want to make sure that every child has the ability to read and write. But if this bill is to pass without this amendment, then I can't in good conscience support this, because I feel as though this is an attempt to teach our kids a specific point of view that I, as a parent, may not agree with, or others may not agree with. So for those reasons, I ask for a yes vote on this amendment.
And Representative Holtorf.
Thank you, Madam Chair, esteemed colleagues. I believe this is a thoughtful amendment with sincere intentions. Now, my frustration this morning is that a thoughtful amendment has been offered. If this isn't the right amendment, then what is the right amendment to address the concerns? I've been told by the bill sponsors we're working on it. Well, let's see if they're working on it, and let's see what amendment would be forthcoming that would meet these concerns. Is there true work being done, or is it just a stonewall against a thoughtful amendment because it wasn't the idea of any stakeholders or bill sponsors in the process? So I would hope that the bill sponsor will offer a thoughtful amendment that will address the issue as we move forward. Media literacy. Is that historical, cultural? What is it? Does it directly deal with race? We have a hypersensitivity in our culture in these days towards the race debate. And that's a fact. But does media literacy really directly deal with that? I argue that it should not. Albeit very important and part of our discussion, it is not directly tied, nor should it be directly tied to this legislation in any forthcoming amendments. Now, here's my problem, ladies and gentlemen, as we go through and write these bills and then offer these amendments, is why can't kids be kids? Why can't kids be kids? With respect to this amendment, we're offering parental involvement at a state level entity here that I believe is going to be a resource bank, and there's going to be a committee or a board that oversees this bank, this resource bank. So as I was reading the fact sheet on this, so we can have processes that sort out fact from fiction, bias and polarity, misinformation or disinformation in the public discourse. But then I realized that we're talking about kids. I would argue that kids grow up too fast already. And as we try to pump all the media literacy, I mean, what does a 10-year-old, 12-year-old kid really need to know about media literacy? How about if they just be kids and enjoy their lives as young adults and grow up without having to deal with and address these adult topics that this particular board apparently and this bank is going to sort and sift, collate, and present to the teachers and the kids, ultimately for the kids, as I understand it, for the kids' benefit. Well, does it truly benefit the children of the state of Colorado when you take all of these very difficult and challenging topics and go through that process and then say, here it is, boys and girls. Now you digest it. Your teachers will help you. The media, what we call here this board, the State Media Literacy Board has collated, sorted, discarded, added, and presented what you have available. And then we have this online resource that is accessible. This particular amendment, despite the issue with the overall premise of the bill, is trying to help for a transparent and inclusive process. So I offer to the bill sponsors and my colleagues that are behind this, if this amendment isn't good enough, then what thoughtful amendment is? That allows for interaction at the state level. Because there are very few committees, boards in this state where they do not allow public comment, public interaction, public discourse, and consideration In fact, this might be the first. This might be the first. Another first for the state of Colorado, and maybe not the right kind. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really want to see, if this isn't the right amendment, I ask the bill sponsors to bring the right amendment forth today, at this time, in this chamber, that addresses the issue. Thank you.
Representative Hanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wonder sometimes if, as a body, we don't go to the negative first rather than the positive. And I wanted to point out the positive on this bill. And it is in line 8, the inclusion of material. And it seems to me including material can be a positive thing. Aren't we working on inclusiveness as a society, as a nation, as a whole? Stephen Ambrose did not always agree with some of the other historians out there, David McCulloch, but it was interesting to read their perspectives because they put a lot of hard work into their research. Jarir and Farazdaq in Middle Eastern literature fought with each other, but it was interesting to read because we saw both sides of it. They were both included in the history that we have even today. And in their own right as historians, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, both presidents, disagreed on a lot of things to the point where their friendship was diminished up until the final days of their lives. But they gave us huge and important perspectives on the founding of this country. So my point is that we would do well to be inclusive of material rather than, and I think that is the intent of this amendment, is not to remove. I don't know that anybody is necessarily afraid of the 1619 project any more than they ought to be afraid of the 1776 project. And I think if we have honest discussion on it, we might find some interesting parallels, some interesting areas to disagree in. You know, and that's how science moved forward, was by competing theories. And look at Tesla and Thomas Edison and how they fought in the press. And what if we only had one side of that? Would we be as advanced as we are now? So I look at the inclusion side of this amendment, and I would ask for an aye vote. Thank you.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, so I've been talking with the drafters of 1103, the sponsors, and so I think what we're going to do is I'm prepared to withdraw this amendment for the time being so that we can kind of work on something, see if we can't get to a point where we're all comfortable. But then that way what that does is we don't need to vote on it. It doesn't become a matter of settled question. If we need to reintroduce the amendment, we can. But this just allows us a little bit of opportunity to have a discussion offline so that others can speak to the bill, because that's the flavor I'm getting. So with that, Madam Chair, I respectfully request to withdraw the amendment for the time being.
Okay, the amendment is withdrawn. Seeing no objection. Okay. Then to the bill. Is there any further discussion? Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So members, for those of you that were here last year, I'm going to channel Jim Wilson for a couple of minutes here. For those of you that weren't here last year, Jim Wilson was the former ranking member on the Education Committee, a former rural superintendent, and he had a lot of sayings that he was pretty famous for. And one of the things that he would always harp on was whenever there was a new program that was coming up, a new idea, he would always point back to the statistic about 40% of our children reading at grade level, and how we were kind of enacting a sort of mission creep. Because really, at the end of the day, I think most of our constituents would agree that the fundamental purpose of the education system is to put people who can read and write into the workforce and give them those foundational skills. And again, media literacy is certainly a worthy goal, but I'm not entirely sure that it should rise above the level of achieving basic literacy for our children. So in that spirit, I'm going to offer Amendment L006 and ask that it be displayed. Oh.
Amendment 1103 has been moved and is properly displayed.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. So
Oh,
Amendment L006 is fairly...
006. My apologies. I got the number wrong.
Absolutely. So Amendment L006 is fairly straightforward, and essentially all that it says is that this bill will not take effect, the implementation of the curriculum will not take effect until 90% of our kids have achieved basic competency in the statewide language arts and social studies exams that are administered. I chose 90% because, you know, this talking about academics, and 90% is an A. I think our children deserve an A. So if we can't at least guarantee that our children have achieved basic competency in math and social studies, I don't know that we should be adding additional burdens that aren't focused on the core central mission of education. So that's essentially what the amendment does, and I urge an aye vote.
Representative McCluskey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Larson, I appreciate your acknowledgement of the challenge that I think we face in our public schools of, you know, having to help our children achieve so many significant gains in academic success. Of course, English language arts, and we have social studies as well. Appreciate that, of course, want all of our kids at 90% proficiency. As we all know, it is a body of learning when you are in school. It is no one specific subject area only that we can devote our time and attention to. I would even argue that it is through a multidisciplinary approach that many of our kids do make gains in reading, in English language arts, and social studies. You know, one of the best things that we have done in math curriculums in our school districts across the state is utilize word problems in more intensive and intentional ways so that we are infusing the experience of math with the experience of reading and helping our kids translate the written word into math problems as just one example. So while Representative Larson, I respect where you're bringing this amendment, I would vote strongly against the amendment because it is in approaching all of these critically important needs in our education system that our kids ultimately succeed.
Representative Van Beber.
I'd like to thank Representative McCloskey for bringing up instruction that discusses interdisciplinary learning. What hasn't been brought up today is that media literacy has been taught in schools for the last 20 years. Well over 25 years ago, the name librarian was transitioned to media specialist. And for the last 20 years, in all disciplines, in the hundreds and hundreds of classrooms that I've been fortunate enough to witness excellent education being done in and being provided for our children here in the state of Colorado, there's not a classroom that I haven't been in where media literacy is not already being taught.
I'm sorry. If we can have a little bit more silence so we could hear Representative Van Beber, that would be excellent. Thank you.
So I would say again that media literacy has been functioning and has had form, especially in the Colorado Department of Educational Standards for Social Studies, which all Colorado students take in their school. So in that vein, I would like to urge a yes vote on Amendment L006, as this is already being done across the board. But I'd like to back up and speak about what is the fundamental question we're talking about here today. What is media literacy? Media literacy, as I've witnessed it, is being taught in the hundreds of classrooms that I just referenced. And what they are teaching is not content information. Media literacy is learning how and why information comes to be, and further how that intended information is used and what is the purpose of it. Teachers are asking children to analyze and critically think about whether or not it's fact, and asking them to use their further analytical processes to think. Is this opinion? Is it agenda-driven? Media literacy is about understanding the minutia. It is not about providing the ideology of a content, especially in today's world of technology. It's about understanding the different kinds of websites and the function of them, which is more credible, a .com, a .edu, a .biz. And it's about understanding who creates the information and why. It's about understanding who pays for this information and why. These are the first and most fundamental questions we must ask our students to thoughtfully use and ask when speaking about media literacy. Media literacy is about establishing a student's ability to wade through millions of pieces of information, process what they believe to be credible, rather than choosing what is given to them as an arbiter of fact because they are experiencing information overload. This is how we create analytical thinking skills. I urge an aye vote on Amendment L006.
Representative McLaughlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would say no to this amendment for many reasons, but I also kind of want to address what has some of the discussion has been today. I was in a very interesting discussion with Chalkbeat the other day, where there were a few of the representatives, but primarily students from all over Colorado. And one of the things they were saying is that we don't have these discussions in class because everybody thinks that what they've read online is right, what they see on Facebook is right. So teachers are not coming up with these discussions about, what some people in here seem to find offensive, that Black Lives Matter and, what's going on socially in Colorado even. This bill helps teachers know where to go for facts. That's all we're looking for is facts. If that makes you afraid of what teachers are teaching, then maybe you ought to go and see what facts are, because that's how we debate. We debate according to facts. This was put together, this resource bank was put together by professionals from all kinds of venues of media. It wasn't just Facebook, it wasn't just television. It was a lot of different things out here. And this is just a suggested list for teachers. Although Representative Van Bever, you are right that a lot of teachers do teach media literacy in their classes. There are many more
Representative
who do
McLaughlin,
not.
if we could stick to the amendment, please.
Oh, darn, I'm sorry. I will just stop there, won't I? So, okay, I will go back to that, the critical reading then. If you know how to read critically, you know how to look for facts. And that's part of it. It's not, that's included in reading. That's something that Representative Wilson would have absolutely wanted, was that we encourage kids to read, and we do it through facts. And if you stop them from looking at facts and evaluating what they're reading, then, and you have to have 90% of them doing it, you're kind of putting the cart before the horse on this. I think reading is evaluating, and reading is not just knowing letters and words. Reading is evaluating what you're learning. And so, yes, this absolutely has to be included in there. And I say absolutely no to the amendment. I went on, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative McLaughlin. Representative Benavides.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I request a title ruling on the amendment.
Okay, brief recess for a title ruling, please. The committee will come back to order. The chair has ruled that the amendment does not fit under the title because media literacy and literacy are two different things. So we will continue to the bill. Representative Carver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move Amendment L009 and ask that it be displayed.
The amendment has been moved and is properly displayed. Representative Carver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I am looking at language on page 4, and this is a significant change in the role of the Media Literacy Advisory Committee. Current law that established the Media Advisory Committee directed them to do a report on media literacy. And one of their charters, which this amendment does not affect. I want to stay with current law on the Media Advisory Committee report, is they were directed to make recommendations to the state board on any revision in curriculum for media literacy. That's in law right now. So this Media Advisory Committee, in their report, is authorized and encouraged to make recommendations to the State Board of Education on how the curriculum should be drawn or modified. That's current law. But what does this bill do? On page 4, lines 4 through 7, it says the knowledge and skills relating to media literacy that the curriculum developed by the state board in media literacy must be substantially consistent with the recommendations made by the Media Literacy Advisory Committee report. So this bill is making a very important change in the Media Literacy Advisory Committee's role. Current law says they make recommendations, give advice, like an advisory committee, to the state board for the state board to consider, and that's fine. But what this bill would do is it would direct the state board that when they're looking at media literacy, they are required to follow the recommendations of the Media Literacy Advisory Committee. Well, respectfully, then it's not really an advisory committee, is it? You've put them in the driver's seat on whatever recommendations they make, the state board must follow. I think that's inappropriate. And so my amendment would simply delete that sentence that the state board must follow the recommendations, or the changes they make must be substantially consistent with, which means you got to follow it, basically. Taking this sentence out still leaves in place current law that this advisory committee has a role in advising the state board on media literacy. And so with that, I ask for an aye vote on the amendment.
Is there any further discussion on Amendment L009? Seeing none, we're going to vote. The question is the passage of 11 L009. All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
No.
The noes have it. To the bill. Is there any further discussion on the bill? Representative Sandridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I stand in opposition to this bill. I think this really isn't a Democrat-Republican thing. I think this is more of we all should have a healthy skepticism of the government deciding what's fact and what's not fact. I've always urged people to go out and do their own research and find out what's real, because the government's not always the best at determining what's real. I don't trust the government in deciding what goes into this bank and what's fact, what's misleading, what's real. If you trust the government to decide what's fact and what should go in this bank, I guess you also believe that the government never misled you at all. At one time, what if we had this bank at the beginning of our country? During the times that the government thought that a certain group of people were less than another group of people. What would be considered truth back then? What would they be teaching our kids? I think it'd be pretty misleading. Do you remember when if we had this bank during World War II and how the government was talking truth about Japanese citizens? We find out later the truth is pretty misleading and discriminatory. I'm curious what the bank would have looked like back then, what they wanted to teach our kids about Japanese citizens during World War II. Do you also remember when we're talking about truth? What if this bank was made during the rise of AIDS and how it was a homosexual disease? What would truth be back then? How would the bank look? It would be wrong and inaccurate. But that's the government telling us what truth is. I remember seeing about smoking. The government said smoke, was on the bandwagon of smoking. It doesn't really hurt. But that was truth. Would the bank have taught our kids that smoking's okay? I'm curious if during the crack epidemic, what the bank would look like of where crack came from. I guarantee there wouldn't be any truth on that. How would the bank look for wars? You think the government would just say, I'm sure they would say all of our wars were justified and it was a great thing and there wasn't anything. I think the bank would be more propaganda than truth. Now let's get something not so. Let's look at something just very meaningful, or not as meaningful. Remember when, at my age, when I grew up and I was in elementary school, they had the food pyramid. How meat and eggs, and I'm nothing against rural and pizza. That was facts. That was facts. This is health. Gosh, I'm going to get blowback on this. But then next thing you know, heart disease is the #1 killer in men. So back then, that was the facts. We're going to teach you the facts. And now we got the #1 heart disease, or heart disease is the #1 killer in men. So I just ask everybody to be cautious, both sides, because you don't want, I would hope that you would be on the opposite end if the other side was running the state, because you wouldn't want their view. Even if we have great intentions, we're not good at picking facts. And we're not the best at times at telling the truth. Like me, I wouldn't push my citizens to any bank that the government molded of truth. I push them to go out, do their own research, legitimate sources. Because if you do agree with this bill, then in a way, you're agreeing with all those examples I gave of the government expressing truth. I just would like you to think about that as you vote. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on the bill? Representative Leck, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill is very short in length because it references a report that we continue to allude to, but I'm not sure, in light of the breakneck speed at which we do policy in this building, whether people have had an opportunity to read the content of this report and know exactly what it is that we are voting on. And so I would like to do just that, to read the content of this report. Media Literacy Advisory Committee report submitted to the House and Senate Education Committees of the Colorado General Assembly by the Media Literacy Advisory Committee, December 2019. Executive summary. Technology has transformed the media landscape. Continuous access to news and information online and through social media, combined with the ability to rapidly share news and information, has created a new urgency to assure students understand how to critically evaluate what they see and hear, and identify the difference between factual information, misinformation, and opinion. In a world where anyone can produce, publish, and share information globally, it is essential that students learn to access, analyze, and evaluate all forms of media and information. Furthermore, to be fully prepared for the world in which they will work, students also need to know how to appropriately and responsibly create and act using media. As required by House Bill 19-1110, the Media Literacy Advisory Committee has prepared recommendations in 6 areas to provide for media literacy education in elementary and secondary schools in Colorado. Key recommendations in this report include the following strategies to improve the media literacy of Colorado students. 1. Systematically address teaching media literacy in all schools. 2. Communicate the critical role teacher librarians play in both digital citizenship and media literacy education. 3. Convey a consistent, coherent message around media literacy that will engage all stakeholders. 4. Ensure media literacy principles are clear and specific in the Colorado academic standards across reading, writing, and civics. 5. Share vetted and research-based resources for media literacy education and professional development throughout the state. 6. Fund professional development, teacher and student recognition, and grants for programming and media literacy. 7. Form community partnerships to increase the effectiveness of media literacy education. Background. During the 2019 legislative session, the Colorado General Assembly passed House Bill 19-1110 concerning implementing media literacy in elementary and secondary education. The bill created an advisory committee within the Colorado Department of Education, appointed by the Commissioner of Education. The committee was responsible for creating a report for the education committees of the House of Representatives and the Senate of the Colorado General Assembly regarding the committee's recommendations for implementing media literacy in elementary and secondary education. Specifically, the statute charged the committee with recommending 1. Revisions to Colorado academic standards for reading, writing, and civics to implement media literacy in elementary and secondary education. 2. Materials and resources for teachers to adopt for media literacy instruction. 3. Legislation or rules to implement media literacy in elementary and secondary education. 4. Best practices for school districts to develop policies and procedures regarding media literacy. 5. Strategies to support school districts implementing the best practices and recommendations developed by the committee. And I believe we're on number 6, opportunities to recognize students and teachers who demonstrate excellence in media literacy. Recruitment and selection of committee members. HB 19-1110 specified that the membership of the Media Literacy Advisory Committee consists of the following members. 1. An academic expert in media literacy. 2. A teacher in a rural school district or small rural school district who holds an initial or professional teacher's license. 3. A teacher in a school district that is not a rural school district or a small rural school district who holds an initial or professional teacher's license. 4. A librarian who is a member of a professional association of librarians. 5, a school administrator in a rural school district or a small rural school district who is a member of a professional association of school administrators. Next, a school administrator in a school district that is not a rural school district or a small school district who is a member of a professional association of school administrators. Next, a parent or legal guardian of a student who attends a public school and is a member of a parent organization. Next, a student in a rural school district or a small rural school district. Next, a student in a school district that is not a rural school district or a small school district. Another, a representative of a nonprofit organization specializing in media literacy, a representative of a nonprofit organization specializing in journalism, a professional print journalist who is a member of a professional association of journalists, a professional broadcast journalist who is a member of a professional association of broadcasters. CDE solicited nominations and applications for the committee through an open application process to determine appointment recommendations for the Commissioner of Education. The application was open from June through August 2019, with 22 applications received for the 13 positions on the committee. CDE recommended applicants to the Commissioner for appointment based on the quality of their application packet and their ability to serve through the duration of the working group. The Commissioner appointed members to the committee in August 2019, and the committee met from September to November to fulfill its charge. Membership of the committee consisted of the following individuals with their representation listed: Zebulon Caraballo, a teacher in a non-rural school; Kyle Clark, a broadcast journalist; Tia Frankish, a librarian; Nathan Gorsh, a non-rural school administrator.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we all want to hear the 108-page report, so if you could keep it down, we'll be able to hear it better. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ryan Hazelwood, broadcast journalist; Bud Hunt, a parent; Tony Pasco, rural school administrator; Amy Resnick, a student in non-rural school district; Marilyn Saltzman, a nonprofit journalism organization; Laura Summers, an academic expert in media literacy; Angela Marie Walks, a teacher in a rural school district; and Robin Wisniewski, a nonprofit media literacy organization. The department was unable to fill the positions of a student in a rural school district and a print journalist despite extensive recruitment efforts. The department included 2 broadcast journalists due to the inability to include a print journalist. Facilitation of the Media Literacy Advisory Committee. As required under HB 19-1110, the department hired a consultant to perform the research and to coordinate the committee's work. The department hired Nancy White, an expert in media literacy and education, to facilitate the committee. Ms. White vetted resources for the committee, including producing a number of reports for the committee to utilize in its recommendation process. Recommendations of the Media Literacy Advisory Committee. In fulfillment of its charge, the committee has made recommendations across the 6 areas delineated in statute. Because of the detailed nature of some of the committee's recommendations, the report includes additional information in the appendices. Recommendations for revisions to Colorado academic standards. To assist the committee, CDE requested support from the Center on Standards and Assessment Implementation at West Ed. The Center on Standards and Assessment and Implementation is acronymed as CSAI. So CSAI developed a report for the committee in the content areas of reading, writing, and civics within the Colorado Academic Standards, or CAS. Using the National Association for Media Literacy Education core principles as a referent, the report identified areas within the reading, writing, and civics, CAS, where media literacy could be addressed. The report contained 34 potential standard revisions recommendations for the committee to consider. To supplement the CSAI report, the committee facilitator produced a report for the MLAC titled Analysis of State Standards in Media Literacy Education, which provided a review of 7 additional international, national, and state standards reference. See Appendix B. After reviewing the benchmarking reports and engaging in numerous discussions, the committee came to consensus on recommendations for revisions to the CAS to make the standards more inclusive of media literacy within the standards. Through their review of the standards reports, the committee recommended that media literacy knowledge and skills can be enhanced within the 2020 CAS in reading, writing, and civics. For Colorado students to become media literate, MLAC recommended that the CAS in these content areas be revised to ensure media literacy principles are clear and specific across reading, writing, and civics, enable students to become critical consumers and creators of media, ensure that students know their rights and responsibilities as speakers and creators of media and texts, include all forms of media, e.g., video, image, multimedia, advertisements, etc., in addition to those forms already included in the standards. Include active inquiry and critical thinking about messages students receive and create. Ensure the writing standards focus on definitions of writing that go beyond just print text to include other forms of media. Highlight the use of media to be an engaged citizen. Call for students to create as well as use information and media. Include digital citizenship and cyberbullying prevention elements within the appropriate grade levels and areas of the standards. Detailed recommendations for revisions to the CAS can be found in Appendix C. Recommendations for materials and resources for teachers. To assist the committee with the task of recommending materials and resources for media literacy instruction, the facilitator provided the committee with 2 reports. The first, Media Literacy Teacher Resources, Appendix D, prepared by the committee facilitator, contained resources shared by Rhode Island, Utah, and Washington, as well as resources that were located and examined during the research and literature review conducted for other reports. Resources were included based on the authority of the source, publication date, and in some cases, external reviews. The Center on Standards and Assessment Implementation, CSAI, created the second report, High Quality Materials and Resources for Media Literacy Instruction, Appendix E. CSAI identified resources using an evaluation tool to review the resources for quality, communication, utility, and evidence of effectiveness. Using the reports and resources provided, the committee was able to make its recommendations. The committee's recommendations for media literacy instruction include materials and resources for students, teachers, and parents. The resources address 3 topic areas: media literacy, digital citizenship, and cyberbullying prevention. The student resource types include curriculum, lesson plans, interactive lessons, activities, and videos. Resources for teacher professional learning include online courses and articles. Parent resources include articles, games, tips, guides, videos, and conversation facilitators. The full list of MLAC recommendations can be found in Appendix F. Recommendations for legislation or rules. To assist the committee with recommendations for legislation or rules, the facilitator conducted a review of states that currently have statutorily authorized programs in place for media literacy education, digital citizenship, and cyberbullying prevention. The review identified policies, programs, and practices in multiple states, many that resulted from legislation similar to HB 19-1110 in Colorado. The facilitator created a report.
If everyone could please just keep their conversations down or keep them off the floor. I am entranced by this report, I have to tell you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The facilitator created a report focusing on 3 state reference, Appendix G, and noted that each state approached media literacy education in a different manner. The committee considered the policies identified in the report in making its recommendations. The following are committee recommendations about how the Colorado General Assembly, which is us, obviously, can support effective implementation of media literacy in elementary and secondary education throughout Colorado. Direct CDE to collect baseline program data from Colorado school districts to determine the effectiveness of existing media literacy and digital citizenship education programs to inform future legislation, rules, and policies. Direct CDE to conduct a needs assessment by surveying district and/or school leaders to determine the extent that media literacy, digital citizenship, and cyberbullying prevention are currently being taught in Colorado schools, and what support is needed to assure media literacy education in their schools. Direct CDE to facilitate community involvement in media literacy education by promoting partnerships with libraries, universities, and parent organizations. Establish a grant program to develop media literacy programs to be integrated in English, social studies, or health classes. Direct CDE to disseminate the work of grantees of a media literacy grant program through partnerships with conferences, events, and opportunities for professional learning. Provide funding for design and delivery of professional development for teachers focused on strategies for integrating media literacy, digital citizenship, and cyberbullying prevention into their instruction. Provide funding to CDE for ongoing support for media literacy programs and resources for students. Recommendations for best practices for policies and procedures. The facilitator prepared 2 reports to support the committee in drafting recommendations for best practices for school districts to develop policies and procedure regarding media literacy. The first, referenced in the previous section, review of policies to support implementation of media literacy education, can be found in Appendix G. The second, best practices in district policies and procedures for media literacy, is available in Appendix H. The findings from these reports inform the recommendations made by the committee. The committee recommends school districts develop policies and procedures that systematically address teaching media literacy in all schools, provide for timely and effective media literacy and digital citizenship instruction that is integrated into the curriculum, specify responsibility for teaching the critical thinking skills central to media literacy education, call for professional development for teachers to develop their media literacy skills so they are better able to support student needs and can learn strategies to effectively teach media literacy within the context of their instruction. Provide teachers with options in what and how they teach media literacy concepts to students. Articulate instruction in and consequences for negative online behavior. Specify education about sexting, including consequences, and provide for periodic review and update of policies for media literacy and digital citizenship. Supporting districts with implementation of the committee's recommendations. The committee recommended 15 strategies to support school districts with implementation of its recommendations, including 9 recommendations for support from CDE and 6 recommendations for districts and schools to support their own efforts to facilitate media literacy education. Recommendations for support from the CDE range from the development of tools and resources to sharing key messages in support of media literacy education. Recommendations for districts and schools to support media literacy education range from obtaining baseline data to inform program planning to developing programs to address specific needs for media literacy, digital citizenship, and cyberbullying prevention. A complete list of the committee's recommendations can be found in Appendix I. Recommendations for opportunities to recognize students and teachers. The committee reviewed programs CDE currently has in place to recognize excellence of both teachers and students. The Highly Effective Schools Through Libraries program and the Personal Financial Literacy MoneyWiser Financial Innovation Awards. While these programs relate to other content areas, the program formats can be replicated for media literacy recognition. In addition to these 2 Colorado programs, the committee reviewed national award programs for media literacy and digital citizenship sponsored by the Public Broadcast System, PBS, Common Sense Education, the National Council of Teachers of English, NCTE, and the Association of Media Literacy Education in the United States, NAMLE. The committee also considered recommendations made by state leaders in media education from Rhode Island and Utah. The committee had 2 recommendations for the Colorado General Assembly for recognizing students and teachers who demonstrate excellence in media literacy. Direct CDE to develop a teacher recognition program that recognizes excellence in media literacy and programs similar to other CDE Teacher Student Recognition Awards that would develop ambassadors for media literacy throughout the state. Direct CDE to create a student recognition program that features and recognizes students' multimedia work promoting media literacy outside of the classroom. Conclusion, through HB 191110, the Colorado General Assembly charged the Media Literacy Advisory Committee with recommendations in 6 areas for implementing media literacy in elementary and secondary education in Colorado. With the assistance of the contracted facilitator, the committee was able to meet its charge. The recommendations contained within this report are extensive and can assist policymakers with future decisions regarding media literacy for Colorado's students. Appendices. Appendix A, Media Literacy Education and the Colorado Academic Standards, a review of reading, writing, and civics. Appendix B, Analysis of State Standards for Media Literacy Education. Appendix C, Media Literacy Advisory Committee Detailed Standards Revision Recommendations. Appendix D, Media Literacy Teacher Resources. Appendix E, High Quality Materials and Resources for Media Literacy Instruction. Appendix F, Media Literacy Advisory Committee Recommendations of Materials and Resources for Media Literacy Instruction. Appendix G, Review of Policies to Support School Implementation of Media Literacy Education. Appendix H, best practices and district policies and procedures for media literacy. Appendix I, strategies to implement the committee's recommendations. Appendix A, media literacy education and the Colorado Academic Standards, a review of reading, writing, and civics. Media literacy education and the Colorado Academic Standards, introduction, definitions, and methodology. Introduction, West Ed's Center on Standards and Assessment Implementation, CSAI, has prepared this report to advise the Colorado Media Literacy Advisory Committee, MLAC, on possible approaches to revising the Colorado academic standards in the domains of reading, writing, and civics to include content related to media literacy education, MLE. This report is intended to help the MLAC fulfill the charge and tasks set forth in Colorado House Bill 191110. The Colorado Department of Education has identified the National Association for Media Literacy Education, core principles, as the referent against which the CAS are to be considered. The namely core principles are intended to articulate a common ground around which media literacy educators and advocates can coalesce, and are intended to serve as a first step in the development of clear, measurable outcomes and benchmarks for U.S. schools. In addition to the namely core principles, CSAI staff have utilized Namely's implications for practice, a set of statements that descend from the namely core principles and further define what media literacy education is and does, as well as identify skills and dispositions that media literate students possess. Definitions. Colorado House Bill 191110 defines media literacy as A, the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act through the various forms of media. B, the ability to analyze the reliability of information, claims, and sources presented in the various forms of media. And C, the practice of digital citizenship, including norms of appropriate and responsible behavior and discourse when engaging with media and the prevention of cyberbullying. Namely's website defines media literacy as the ability to encode and decode the symbols transmitted via media and the ability to synthesize, analyze, and produce mediated messages. Namely further elaborates on this definition, stating that media literacy is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication. Media literacy represents a necessary, inevitable, and realistic response to the complex, ever-changing electronic environment and communication cornucopia that surround us. This elaborated definition aligns with Section A of the Colorado House Bill definition, suggesting that the namely core principles may be an appropriate and relevant referent for this review of the CAS. While House Bill 191110 does not explicitly define what media is, Namely offers the following definition, which will be used to inform the recommendations in this report. Media refers to all electronic or digital means and print or artistic visuals used to transmit messages. This definition is taken to indicate that media encompasses both print and digital forms of expression, and that media can be either informational or literary, artistic in genre. Methodology. Selection of reference standards. After review of various state and international standards for media literacy, CDE selected the namely core principles to serve as the reference standards for this evaluation. Analysis of reference standards. CSAI and analysts reviewed the namely core principles and implications for practice, as well as the key questions associated with the core principles. This review indicated that while the core principles themselves are relevant to the review of the CAS, the implications for practice that descend from the core principles vary in terms of their relevance to academic standards. Some implications for practice articulate measurable skills that may profitably be integrated into academic standards. For example, implication for practice 1.4 states, MLE trains students to use document-based evidence and well-reasoned arguments to support their conclusions. Other implications for practice, however, are more focused on providing a definition of media literacy education. For example, implication for practice 1.8 states, simply using media in the classroom does not constitute MLE. While this is an important point for educators to consider as they integrate MLE into their practice, it does not readily lend itself to integration into academic standards that articulate what students know and can do. This and similar implications for practice are more appropriate to include in resources that support understanding and instructional application of the principles of media literacy education. Therefore, CSAI analysts identified the namely implications for practice that most strongly comport with the goals and purposes of academic standards. These implications for practice are listed in the appendix. Analysis of Colorado academic standards. CSAI analysts also reviewed the CAS to identify junctures at which the relevant, namely core principles and implications for practice might be incorporated, and to identify aspects of the CAS that might be modified to reflect MLE principles and practices. The sections on each content area identify and further elaborate upon the specific aspects of the CAS that might be modified or that might offer opportunities for integrating MLE content. CSAI analysts reviewed the prepared graduate statements and grade level expectations in reading, writing, and civics, and identified ways in which these elements of the CAS might be modified to reflect the namely core principles. Modifying the prepared graduate statements and grade level expectations would establish a high-level focus on media literacy within the CAS, ensuring that media literacy is understood to be part of the concepts and skills that all students who complete the Colorado education system must master to ensure their success in a post-secondary and workforce setting. CAS definition of prepared graduate statements. At a more granular level, CSAI analysts also considered the elements of the CAS that are organized under the academic contexts and connections heading. Per the CAS, academic contexts and connections are the subject-specific elements needed to create context for learning. This section highlights essential skills, practices, and other important connections necessary for students to understand, apply, and transfer the knowledge and skills within the grade level expectation. It is CSAI's understanding that the MLAC seeks to both broaden the context for learning to include media literacy and to draw connections between discipline-specific skills and practices and those that pertain to media literacy. Therefore, the academic context and connections section of the CAS appeared to be an appropriate place in which to propose integration of MLE content or modification of existing content to reflect MLE principles and practices. As CSAI analysts reviewed the content organized under academic contexts and connections for each subject area, it became clear that the Colorado Essential Skills merited consideration apart from any one subject area. The Colorado Essential Skills Framework articulates skills and practices that transcend specific subject areas. Per the CDE, developmentally appropriate support for these skills should occur in all subject areas throughout students' academic careers. In order to respect the unique transdisciplinary status of the essential skills, they are considered in a separate section within this report. Further, CSAI's review of the CAS in reading, writing, and civics suggested that the evidence outcomes in these domains were a less productive juncture for integrating MLE content in comparison to the content organized under academic contexts and connections. The evidence outcomes articulate highly specific skills that are essential to each domain, but that generally offer limited opportunities for making connections with media literacy. Scope of analysis. It is important to note that CSAI analysts understood their charge to be making high-level recommendations for integrating the namely core principles and implications for practice into the CAS. While this report cites examples of alignment between the CAS and the namely core principles and implications for practice, it does not exhaustively consider alignment between namely content and every element in the CAS, nor does it recommend specific revisions to the wording of the CAS, as this is understood to be the charge of the MLAC. Rather, this report seeks to propose an approach and provide options that the MLAC might utilize in making the specific modifications with which it is charged. Media literacy education and the Colorado Academic Standards for reading. Introduction. Review of the Colorado Academic Standards for reading reveals a wealth of opportunities for integrating content from the namely core principles and the namely key questions. This section proposes approaches for modifying the prepared graduate statements, grade level expectations, essential reasoning skills, and essential questions that are found in the CAS in the domain of reading. With regard to the domain of reading, it is important to note that the namely definition of media appears to encompass both literary and informational genres. Media refers to all electronic or digital means and print or artistic visuals used to transmit messages. Similarly, the state of Colorado's definition of media literacy does not explicitly limit media to either the informational or the literary realm. Therefore, it seems appropriate to consider integrating media literacy principles into aspects of the CAS that deal with literature and with informational texts. Further, it may be appropriate to consider the applicability of the general term reading in the context of media literacy. Media messages are often experienced through viewing and listening, as well as through interpretation of written text. The MLAC may want to consider the use of a word that is medium agnostic, or consider whether reading ought to be understood to encompass other receptive modes of engaging with media. Prepared graduate statements. The prepared graduate statements for reading broadly articulate concepts and skills that all students who complete the Colorado education system must master to ensure their success in a post-secondary and workforce setting. In the domain of reading, there are 3 prepared graduate statements that apply across all grade levels. 1. Read a wide range of literary texts to build knowledge and to better understand the human experience. 2. Read a wide range of informational texts to build knowledge and to better understand the human experience. 3. Understand how language functions in different contexts, command a variety of word-learning strategies to assist comprehension, and make effective choices for meaning or style when writing and speaking. Because of their breadth, each of these statements might easily be modified to encompass media literacy. Namely, Core Principle 2 states, media literacy education expands the concept of literacy, i.e. reading and writing, to include all forms of media. In keeping with this principle, the first 2 prepared graduate statements for reading might be revised to explicitly state that the wide range of literary texts and wide range of informational texts include all forms of media. Similarly, the 3rd prepared graduate statement might explicitly clarify that the different contexts in which language functions include the context of media messages. Grade level expectations. The potential approach for modifying the grade level expectations, or GLEs, in reading is similar to the approach that is proposed for modifying the prepared graduate statements. Though the grade level expectations are, as the name implies, specific to each grade level, the GLEs in reading as a whole deal generally with skills pertaining to literary texts, informational texts, and use of language and vocabulary across genres. GLEs for preschool through grade 2 also address foundational reading skills, which are a necessary area of focus at those grade levels, but are secondary to the purpose of this report. The 3 GLEs for grade 6 are listed below in order to provide a concrete example, but the discussion that follows is intended to apply across GLEs at all grade levels. 1. Analyze literary elements within different types of literature to make meaning. 2. Analyze organization and structure of informational text to make meaning. 3. Apply knowledge of word relationships, word structures, and sentence structures to determine the meaning of new words in context. As with the prepared graduate statements, namely Core Principle 2, media literacy education expands the concept of literacy, i.e. reading and writing, to include all forms of media, might be integrated into the first 2 GLEs by simply clarifying that different types of literature and informational text are understood to include forms of media. The 3rd GLE's focus on vocabulary is perhaps less pertinent to media literacy education, but it is certainly possible that the skills in this GLE could be demonstrated in the context of media as well as in the context of more conventional types of texts. It is also significant to note that the GLEs for the grade 11-12 band already reflect the emphasis on critical thinking that is essential to the namely core principles. As namely Core Principle 1 states, media literacy education requires active inquiry and critical thinking about the messages we receive and create. Emphasis added. The first 2 grade 11-12 GLEs explicitly mirror this language. Interpret and evaluate complex literature using various critical reading strategies, and interpret and evaluate complex informational texts using various critical reading strategies. The 3rd GLE for this grade band, understand how language influences the comprehension of narrative, argumentative, and informational texts, implicitly reflects the idea captured in the namely implication for practice 1.1 that all media messages are constructed and that each medium has a unique language of construction. This analysis suggests that the Colorado GLEs culminate in expectations that are strongly aligned with specific, namely core principles. Further opportunity exists in grades 3 through 8 through review and revision of the GLE language to reinforce the idea that both informational and literary texts might include different forms of media, and to emphasize that the process of engaging with these texts might encompass actions other than reading. Essential reasoning skills. The CAS for reading include at each grade level or grade band a set of essential reasoning skills that offer further, more specific opportunities for integrating media literacy content within academic contexts and connections, which are the subject-specific elements needed to create context for learning. This section of the CAS highlights essential skills, practices, and other important connections necessary for students to understand, apply, and transfer the knowledge and skills within the grade level expectation. According to the CAS, the essential reasoning skills develop critical thinking, building awareness to multiple perspectives, and engage students in thinking about their thinking and to consider their own attitudes, beliefs, and biases on issues. These general skills and dispositions all align at various junctures with namely core principles and implications for practice. The following analysis considers each focal area of the essential reasoning skills in relation to relevant namely core principles and implications for practice. Examples are provided of instances where the essential reasoning skills and the implications for practice already align, and instances where the implications for practice may be more thoroughly and intentionally integrated. It is important to note that this is not an exhaustive analysis of every instance of alignment or potential integration. Rather, this analysis seeks to provide instructive examples that may guide the MLAC's thinking. Developing critical thinking, namely core principle 1, establishes that media literacy education requires active inquiry and critical thinking about the messages we receive and create. Implications for practice 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4 further elaborate on the role of critical thinking in media literacy in ways that may be applicable to the CAS. For instance, the emphasis on using document-based evidence in implication for practice 1.4 is already reflected in some essential reasoning skills, e.g. explain or connect ideas using supporting evidence, quote, example, text references at grade 7. To more thoroughly integrate this implication for practice into the CAS, similar grade-appropriate skills emphasizing the use of evidence might be added at those grade levels at which other skills currently receive more emphasis. For example, adjacent grades 6 and 8 currently lack an essential reasoning skill that emphasizes the use of evidence. The essential reasoning skills for preschool through grade 5 are phrased as statements about what critical readers do, e.g., critical readers ask questions and draw conclusions from pictures and texts. This phrasing may be useful beyond grade 5 in emphasizing the centrality of critical reading and thinking. Building awareness of multiple perspectives. Namely, core principle 5 asserts that media literacy education recognizes that media are a part of culture and function as agents of socialization. Under this core principle, implication for practice 5.1 states that MLE integrates media texts that present diverse voices, perspectives, and communities. Further, namely implication for practice 6.6 under core principle 6 emphasizes the use of group discussion and analysis of media messages to help students understand and appreciate different perspectives and points of view. These ideas are currently best reflected in the essential reasoning skills at grade 8 and above. For instance, the emphasis on appreciating different perspectives in implication for practice 6.6 is already reflected in an essential reasoning skill at grade 9 and 10. Evaluate the ways exposure to and interpretation of multiple perspectives is important to being a member of a global society. To more thoroughly integrate this implication for practice into the CAS, skills emphasizing appreciation for diverse perspectives might be added at grade 7 and below, as developmentally appropriate. Thinking about thinking, considering students' own attitudes, beliefs, and biases, namely core principle 6 affirms that people use their individual skills, beliefs, and experiences to construct their own meanings from media messages. An implication for practice 6.2 states that MLE helps students become aware of and reflect on the meaning that they make of media messages, including how the meaning they make relates to their own values. The idea of reflection on thought processes is explicitly captured in a grade 8 essential reasoning skill. Analyze the points of view, implications and consequences, inferences, assumptions, and concepts inherent in thinking. Opportunities exist to more explicitly articulate this skill at other grade levels, as it is currently only called out at grade 8. Given that metacognition is a sophisticated skill, it may make sense to place the most emphasis on this skill at higher grade levels. Essential questions. In addition to the essential reasoning skills, the CAS at each grade level or grade band include a range of essential questions that, per the CAS, are big picture questions that ask students to more deeply explore the concepts and skills expressed in the GLE. The essential questions offer a uniquely fruitful juncture for integrating MLE content into the CAS, as NAMELY has developed a set of key questions that derive from the core principles. The MLAC may find that overlap already exists between the NAMELY key questions and the CAS essential questions, particularly across Standard 2, which deals with informational text. For example, the 4 essential questions for Standard 2 at grade 8 are: how do we evaluate an author's credibility? How do visuals convey information? How can bias influence a reader? What elements make a text more attractive to some readers than others? Namely, key questions that pertain to these 4 essential questions include: how credible is this media product, and how do you know? How do the techniques communicate the message? What ideas, information, or points of view are overt, implied? How might different people understand this message differently? One course of action the MLAC might consider is modifying the essential questions that are most relevant to media literacy education so that they use language and/or concepts from the NAMELY key questions. As an alternative, the MLAC might consider which NAMELY key questions best comport with the CAS GLEs at each grade level, and then propose adoption of those key questions as additional essential questions. Media literacy education and the Colorado Academic Standards, writing. Introduction. Review of the Colorado Academic Standards for Writing reveals a wealth of opportunities for integrating content from the NAMELY core principles and the NAMELY key questions. This section proposes approaches for modifying the prepared graduate statements, grade level expectations, essential reasoning skills, and essential questions that are found in the CAS in the domain of writing. With regard to the domain of writing, it is important to note that the NAMELY definition of media appears to encompass informational, argumentative, and narrative genres. Media refers to all electronic or digital means and print or artistic visuals used to transmit messages. Similarly, the state of Colorado's definition of media literacy does not explicitly limit media to the informational, argumentative, or narrative realm. Therefore, it seems appropriate to consider integrating media literacy principles into aspects of the CAS that deal with all 3 genres of writing. Further, it may be appropriate to consider the applicability of the general term writing in the context of media literacy. Media messages are often created through production of visual and oral stimuli, as well as through production of written text. While it may not be feasible or appropriate to change the name of the domain, the MLAC may want to consider the use of a word within individual writing standards or components of standards that is medium agnostic, or consider whether writing ought to be understood to encompass all aspects of the creation of media. Prepared graduate statements. The prepared graduate statements broadly articulate concepts and skills that all students who complete the Colorado education system must master to ensure their success in a post-secondary and workforce setting. In the domain of writing, there are 4 prepared graduate statements that apply across all grade levels. Craft arguments using techniques specific to the genre. Craft informational, explanatory texts using techniques specific to the genre. Craft narratives using techniques specific to the genre. Demonstrate mastery of their own writing process with clear, coherent, and error-free, polished products. The first 3 prepared graduate statements in writing may be interpreted in such a way as to already encompass media literacy. Because of the medium-agnostic language that is used in these statements, e.g. craft instead of write and texts instead of essays, the MLAC may elect to simply clarify that arguments, informational, explanatory texts, and narratives include all forms of media, as well as simply those that are written. In contrast, the 4th prepared graduate statement explicitly focuses on the writing process. This language may be broadened to clarify that the statement is intended to address the process of creating media as well as the process of producing written texts. Grade level expectations. The potential approach for modifying the grade level expectations in writing is similar to the approach that is proposed for modifying the prepared graduate statements. Though the grade level expectations are specific to each grade level, the GLEs in writing as a whole deal generally with skills pertaining to argumentative texts, informative explanatory texts, narrative texts, and the writing process and conventions. There's only one preschool learning and development expectation analogous to a GLE, which is appropriate given the emergent state of literacy at this developmental stage. Quote, familiarity with writing implements, conventions, and emerging skills to communicate through written representations, symbols, and letters, end quote. The 4 GLEs for grade 7, writing, are listed below in order to provide a concrete example, but the discussion that follows is intended to apply across writing GLEs at all grade levels, except preschool. Write, well-organized arguments using logical reasoning, relevant and credible evidence, acknowledgement of opposing claims, clear language, and formal style. Write well-developed informative explanatory texts using logical organizational strategies, relevant supporting information, domain-specific vocabulary, and formal style. Write engaging real or imagined narratives, effectively using techniques such as relevant description, sensory language, dialogue, and logical pacing to capture the action and detail experiences and events.
Are you finished, Representative Flunk, or
May I pause this riveting reading and?
It was a riveting reading, but I think the Madam Majority Leader wishes to be called upon, if
Yes,
that's
I
acceptable.
think she would like to
Thank
have a
you.
chance to speak.
Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to lay over House Bill 1103 to the end of the special orders calendar.
I've heard the motion, and seeing no objection, we will lay over House Bill 1103 until the end of the special orders calendar. Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I move to lay over the remainder of the special orders calendar until tomorrow.
Okay, seeing no objection, we'll lay over the remainder of the special orders calendar until tomorrow. Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move the committee rise and report.
You have heard the motion. Hearing no objection, the committee will rise and report.
All right, I'm ready. Sorry. The House will come back to order. Mr. Gregorio, please read the Committee of the Whole report.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee of the Whole begs leave to report has under consideration the following attached bills, being second reading thereof, and makes the following recommendations thereon. Senate Bill 68, Senate Bill 90 passed on second reading in order of revised and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. House Bill 21-1060, 1076, 1097, 1114, 1103 laid over until 3/12/21 and retaining their place on the calendar.
Representative Kipp. Thank you, Representative Kipp. There are no amendments at the desk. Members, the question before us is the adoption of the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Gregorio, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Those participating remotely, Representative Neville, how do you vote?
No.
Representative Neville votes no. Representative Ricks, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Ricks votes yes. Representative Michelson-Janae, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Michelson-Janae votes yes. Representative McLaughlin, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative McLaughlin votes yes. Representative Hooton, Representative Judah, Representative Judah and Representative Hooton are excused and will have a $5 fine each. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Please close the machine. With 38 aye votes, 24 no votes, and 3 excused, the report of the Committee of the Whole is adopted. That will bring us back to announcements and introductions. Representative Herod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Appropriations Committee, we will be meeting tomorrow morning at 8:30 to hear one bill. Members, please let me know if you plan to participate remotely tomorrow morning for appropriations. We do need to get that into staff basically ASAP. So please do let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 8:30.
Representative Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to announce that I've talked to the minority leader and the majority leader and have gotten permission to be excused Monday and Tuesday.
That is approved. That is approved, Representative Soper. Sounds like you have to go get some more approval from your side. Representative Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of House, State, Civic, Military, and Veterans Affairs, we will be meeting in 15 minutes, 11:55, in LSBA to hear House Bills 1011, 1074, and 1113.
I have a quick announcement. Representative Larson will replace Representative Bradfield on the Committee on Finance for today only. Okay, any further announcements or introductions? Before we move to the Majority Leader, Mr. Gregorio, please read reports of committees of reference.
Committee on Energy and Environment, after consideration on the merits, the committee recommends the following. House Bill 1040 be postponed indefinitely. House Bill 1052 be amended as follows and be so amended, be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation. House Bill 1131 be amended as follows and be so amended, be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation. Committee on Health and Insurance, after consideration on the merits, the committee recommends the following. House Bill 1020 be postponed indefinitely. Committee on Transportation and Local Government, after consideration on the merits, the committee recommends the following. House Bill 1028 be amended as follows and be so amended, be referred to the Committee on Appropriations with favorable recommendation. House Bill 1117 be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation.
Signing of bills, resolutions, and memorials.
The Speaker has
Signing of
signed.
bills, resolutions, and memorials will be printed in the journal. Majority Leader Escar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House stand in recess until later today.
Seeing no objection, the House will stand in recess until later today.